His breath trembled. Just the smallest shift, the kind you wouldn't notice unless you were right there. Unless you were holding his hand. Unless you were me. I was wrapping the gauze over his palm, carefully, like I'd done 1,000 times before. But this time felt different. And not because of the wound. He wasn't flinching from the pain. He was watching me. Not in the way men watch women. Not that surface-level glance, not that polite smile. He was watching me like he'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. And I felt it. Right there in that tiny little clinic room. The sterile smell of alcohol in the air. The hum of that flickering fluorescent light above us. Outside, people were coughing in the hallway, typing on keyboards, going about their lives. But inside that moment, that breath, that glance, it felt like the whole world had hushed. Just for us. I looked up. I met his eyes. And something passed between us that scared me more than anything ever had. Because it wasn't lust. It wasn't flirty or playful or curious. It was recognition. Like his soul had knocked on a door inside mine. And mine had opened. He didn't say anything, neither did I. But my fingers lingered just a second too long. My thumb brushed his skin. And when I finally let go, he didn't. He held on just for a moment. Just enough to tell me he felt it too. Now, I know how this sounds. I'm not proud of it. I wasn't out looking for something. I didn't wake up that morning thinking, let me find a stranger to make me feel seen. But when you've been invisible in your own marriage, when the person who sleeps beside you every night hasn't looked at you in years, when the only time you feel needed is when someone's asking what's for dinner, or where their socks are, or why the Wi-Fi isn't working, that 1 second of being noticed, it hits you like lightning. Not on your skin, but in your chest, your heart, your sense of self. And suddenly, all the walls you built to keep yourself safe start to crack. It wasn't the pain that made him look at me like that. It was something deeper. Something neither of us had words for. Not yet. But it was coming. And it was going to ruin everything I thought I knew about myself. Gentle inhale. Before I tell you what happened next, please like this video, subscribe to Olivia Touching Tales, and let yourself feel this story with me. Because I promise, this isn't just about what happened with him. It's about what happened to me. The room was still. Not silent, no. Hospitals are never truly silent. There's always some kind of hum. The quiet beep of the heart monitor. The soft click of rubber soles on tile outside the door. That ever-present buzz of fluorescent lights that never quite sleep. But this room, it was hushed. Dim. Almost like it knew something was happening here, something delicate. And it didn't want to interrupt. The blinds were half drawn. Muted light poured in, not warm like sunlight, but soft. Faded, like memories. It spilled across the sheets, across his hand. The same hand I had just finished wrapping. He was still holding it. Not tightly. Not intentionally, even. But there was a kind of quiet gravity between us, like maybe letting go would mean admitting something had just passed between us. His fingers were calloused, but warm. I noticed the little things, the curve of his knuckles, the faint tremble that hadn't stopped. Not from pain. From something else. I should have pulled away. I should have stood up and walked out of that room like I'd done 100 times before. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed. Just for a moment longer. And in that moment, I listened to the sound of his breathing, the way it slowed when mine slowed. How our lungs seemed to find a rhythm together. Not on purpose. Not planned. But felt. His voice, when he finally spoke, was gravelly. Low. Not harsh. Nothing about him was harsh. There was a softness in it. A steadiness. Like he wasn't speaking to ask for anything. Just to exist beside me. Thank you, he said. Simple words. But they landed differently. Like maybe he wasn't just thanking me for the bandage. Maybe he was thanking me for being there. For seeing him. For touching him like he was human, not broken. I caught the scent of him then, beneath the sharp tang of antiseptic. There was something else. Something warm, earthy, a faint cologne, maybe, or just the smell of his skin. Clean, but lived in. Familiar in a way that unsettled me. And then, his thumb brushed the side of my hand. Not by accident. I know the difference. It wasn't bold. It wasn't suggestive. It was gentle. Tentative. Like he was asking a question without words. And I didn't pull away. I looked down at our hands. His, still resting in mine. And I realized my fingertips had curled slightly. Holding back, but holding. There's a kind of intimacy no one talks about. The space between words. The glance held a second too long. The breath shared in stillness. That's what we were in. Not lust. Not fantasy. Not yet. But presence. Real, electric presence. And in that space, time folded. I wasn't thinking about my husband. Or the fact that I had a wedding ring hidden beneath my glove. Or that I was a professional, and this was unprofessional. I was just thinking how long it had been since someone looked at me like I mattered. Like I was something good. Like I hadn't already faded into the background of my own life. His eyes weren't demanding. They weren't entitled. They were asking. And I was answering. With silence. With stillness. With the way I let my thumb stay resting against his wrist, feeling the soft, steady pulse there. The kind of pulse that tells you, I'm alive. And you make me feel more so. He looked down then. At our hands. And then slowly. Back at me. No words. Just breath. That quiet, aching breath of two people teetering on the edge of something that shouldn't be happening. But already was. I told myself it was nothing. That it didn't mean anything. But I knew. I knew it was the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. Something I hadn't dared imagine for years. I stood slowly. And this time, he let me go. But not before his fingers slipped away from mine like a secret. Like a promise neither of us had the courage to speak yet. I walked out of that room. And something in me stayed behind. Something that hadn't felt touched in a long, long time. I walked out of that room. And into another kind of quiet. The kind that doesn't buzz or hum. The kind that doesn't wrap around you gently. The kind that echoes. Home. It's supposed to be your softest place to land, right? But mine had become a hallway of closed doors and turned backs. Muted dinners. Chairs scraping floors louder than the conversations we barely had anymore. I go home to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the avoidant kind. The kind of silence that says, I don't know how to reach you anymore, so I won't even try. My husband, he's not a bad man. I want to make that clear. He tries. He asks if I need anything from the store. He rubs my back sometimes when I'm folding laundry. He tells me I look tired, then falls asleep before I can answer. He lives beside me. But he doesn't see me. Not like he used to. Not like I need. And it's not his fault. It's not anyone's fault, really. We built something practical. Solid. Responsible. We built a life. Not a love story. There's food in the fridge. The bills are paid. The guest towels are neatly folded and untouched, just like parts of me. But somewhere between managing calendars and grocery lists, I stopped being a woman and started being a function. A wife. A helper. A placeholder for who I used to be. I used to feel alive. Wild. Laughing until my ribs ached. Crying openly. Touching freely. Dreaming big. Now, I feel efficient. I keep everything running, but I don't feel anything running through me. Except when I'm at work. With strangers. Patience. It sounds ridiculous, I know. But sometimes, helping someone heal is the only time I feel like I exist beyond the walls I've built. And him. That man with the quiet eyes and the hurt hand. He didn't just look at me. He noticed me. Not because he needed something. Not because he was trying to flatter me. But because in that brief, still moment, he saw something I thought was long gone. He looked at me like I was still art. Like I still had color. Like I hadn't faded into the background of my own life. It did something to me. It cracked something open. Something I had buried beneath years of being fine. Because the truth is, it's not just about being touched. Anyone can touch you. It's about being cherished. It's about someone looking at you and seeing the parts you didn't even know were showing. It's about being mirrored. Reflected back to yourself through the eyes of someone who sees more than just your role. He made me feel like a person again. Not a provider. Not a problem solver. Not a hey, can you just? But a woman. With hunger. With weight. With quiet, aching needs. And that scared me. Because once you feel that again, even just a flicker, it's hard to go back to numb. It's hard to go back to saying, I'm just tired. When what you really mean is, I haven't been touched with intention in years. I started wondering, am I only whole when I'm giving pieces of myself away? Is that why I work so much? Is that why I stay late, pick up extra shifts, volunteer for the cases no one wants? Maybe healing others was the only way I knew how to survive my own emptiness. Maybe if I kept pouring out, I wouldn't have to sit still long enough to feel how empty I've become. And yet, with him, I wasn't pouring. I wasn't giving. I was receiving. Just a glance. A brush of skin. And suddenly, I felt more me than I had in years. Not because he gave me anything, but because I remembered there was something still in me worth seeing. And once you've seen that again, once you've felt that heat rise from under the dust of your everyday life, you can't unfeel it. You can't unknow it. I went home that night and crawled into bed beside a man I've known half my life. He turned away, already drifting, and I laid there wide awake. Not lonely, not angry, just aware. Aware that there was a part of me still alive, still needing, still waiting. And now, it had been awakened. By someone who wasn't mine. He came back. Not because he needed stitches removed or a wound checked. He came back because he wanted to. It was supposed to be a quick follow-up. A simple check-in. Just routine, I told myself as I read his name on the schedule that morning. But when he walked through the door, he didn't look like someone recovering. He looked ready, open, clear-eyed, still carrying that same quiet intensity that had tangled itself into the corners of my thoughts since that first day. He sat across from me, still, like he was waiting for something I hadn't offered yet. His hand was fully healed. No dressing, no pain. But he kept flexing it slowly, like it was reminding him of something deeper. Something invisible. We did the basics. Vitals. Reflexes. Notes on a chart I barely glanced at. And then, he lingered. Just a second too long. That kind of pause that feels like a question, but isn't shaped like one. I looked up from the clipboard. And he said it. You don't seem like you're being cared for. The way you care for others. That's all he said. But it landed in me like a slow, silent collapse. I laughed. That kind of brittle laugh we use to patch up too much truth. I said something stupid like, well, that's life, isn't it? Or maybe I didn't say anything at all. I don't remember the words that followed. Because all I could hear was the rightness of what he said. The unbearable accuracy of it. He left. And the air in the room shifted. It felt heavier and lighter. Like something had been broken and something had just been born. That night, I stood in the shower longer than I should have. The water too hot, the light too dim. And I replayed his voice in my head over and over again. You don't seem like you're being cared for. The way you care for others. It wasn't just a statement. It was an invitation. And, for the first time, I started asking myself questions I'd been avoiding for years. Am I allowed to want more? If I'm not being starved? If no one's hurting me? But no one's holding me either. Do I still get to ask for something deeper? Can you be in love and still feel unmet? Can you have everything and still feel like you're disappearing? And then came the message. Just a simple line on my phone. No punctuation. No pressure. If I could give you back to yourself, would you let me? I read it 3 times. And then again, later alone in the kitchen, barefoot, staring into the fridge like it held the answers. If I could give you back to yourself, would you let me? I didn't answer. Not with words. But my breath caught. My fingers tingled. And something inside me leaned forward. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't even a maybe. It was a recognition of something I had locked away so tightly, it took someone else's courage to wake it up. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub later that night, towel wrapped around me like armor. And I whispered to the mirror. I don't know what I'm doing, but the mirror didn't laugh. It didn't judge. It just stared back. Soft, open, bare. And in that reflection, in my own eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long, long time. Longing, not for him, necessarily, but for me, the version of me that felt wanted, known, held. I didn't reply to his message, but I left the read receipt on. And we both knew what that meant. It meant the door wasn't closed. It meant something had shifted, and neither of us was pretending anymore. Days passed. Not many, but enough to feel like a breath held too long. Enough to feel the weight of something coming. Not crashing, no, not violent. More like a tide turning. Then, he reached out again. Not late at night. Not in a flurry of longing. But in the early morning stillness, the hour where truth is quiet and unassuming. He said, I want to show you something. I didn't know what that meant. And I didn't ask. I just stood in my closet later that evening, staring at clothes that suddenly all felt like costumes. What do you wear when you're not sure who you're going to be? I settled on softness. Nothing loud. Something I could disappear in, or emerge from if I needed to. He met me at the door. Didn't touch me. Didn't lean in. Just smiled in that slow, unreadable way of his. Like he'd already seen something unfold. He drove us through winding streets. City lights fading into amber shadows. We stopped in front of a small brick building tucked behind a row of trees. No signs. No labels. Just quiet. He held the door for me. And I stepped into something I still can't quite explain. It was a room. But not just a room. The light was dim, like dusk had been poured into the walls. Candles, not many, but enough to soften the edges of everything. Warm wooden floors. A low hum of music, like breath turned into melody. And in the center, a mat, a blanket, and nothing else. No agenda. No performance. Just space. He turned to me. I used to guide touch therapy, he said. He must have seen the flicker of confusion in my eyes. Because he added, gently, it's not what you think. It's not about fixing or taking. It's about presence. About being with sensation. With yourself. I nodded slowly, but inside. I was running. Every instinct told me to protect, to deflect, to joke my way out of this depth. But I didn't move. Because his voice didn't reach for me, it waited. And his eyes, they didn't ask for anything. They just invited. He gestured to the room. To explore. If you want, you can say no at any point. Or yes, and see who you're underneath. There was no seduction in his tone. Only safety. Only spaciousness. And I realized, that's what I'd been missing. Not heat. Not hands. Not a thrill. Space. Room to unfold. To not be functional. To not be someone's wife, or someone's backbone. Just someone. I stepped forward. Slowly, like the floor might disappear beneath me. And I crossed the threshold. The door closed behind me. Not locked, but chosen. And that felt bigger than anything else. Because I hadn't been choosing myself for years. I hadn't even realized how much I'd abandoned until that moment I returned. He walked toward the mat and sat, cross-legged, still, then looked up at me. No pressure. Just breath. Just presence. Whatever happens is welcome. And whatever doesn't is holy too. I sat across from him. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from how foreign this all felt. To be invited without expectation. To be seen without being pursued. He guided me to close my eyes. To breathe in through my nose. to let the exhale drop lower than I thought possible. And for a long time, that's all we did. Breathe. No touch. No talk. Just two people returning to themselves. And then, gently, he asked, "May I touch your hand?" I nodded. And when his fingers found mine, they didn't grab or lead. They listened. Like they'd been waiting for my rhythm. Not the world's. And I had never felt more human, more tuned in, more present. It wasn't sexual. Not yet. It was spiritual. Like someone had placed their hands on the parts of me I didn't know were starving. He stayed there. Just the hand. Just the breath. Until tears blurred my vision, not from pain, but from recognition. And for the first time in so long, I didn't pull away. I didn't apologize for needing. I just let him hold the version of me that no one else even remembered existed. And in that quiet, candlelit room, I whispered a truth I hadn't dared speak until that night. "I think I've been asleep." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because this was the awakening. He didn't move quickly. Didn't reach for more. Just stayed with my hand. His thumb brushed a slow circle across the back of it. Not claiming, witnessing. And even in that tiny motion, I felt something stir. Something I didn't know was still in me. But my body flinched. Not from him. From memory. The ghosts of nights I'd turned away. Of hands that reached for me like I was a task. Not a temple. He saw it. He didn't shrink. He didn't try to explain it away. He just stayed. Breathing. Grounded. Unmoved by my reaction. But deeply attuned to it. And in that stillness, I began to exhale. It wasn't about seduction. There was no game. It was about permission. The kind I hadn't felt in years. The kind that says, you don't have to be okay to be held. You don't have to perform to be worthy. I didn't realize how tight my chest had been. Until I finally let it soften. For the first time in years, I was safe in my own skin. His hand moved. Not rushed. Not greedy. Just intentional. To the small of my back. Open. Warm. He wasn't pressing. Just offering a presence. Where I'd been hollow. And when I felt it, that grounded weight, I broke. The tears came so suddenly. I almost apologized. Almost tried to swallow them. But I didn't. Because he whispered, "You're allowed to feel this much." And I did. God, I did. My shoulders shook. But not from fear. From release. From finally being touched like I wasn't just skin and nerves, but memory and longing and grief and girlhood. It wasn't erotic. Not yet. It was intimate. It was the kind of intimacy that makes you want to remember your mother. Your childhood laughter. Every time you begged for someone to stay. My heart ached. But not in pain. In expansion. Like it had been held too tightly for too long. And was now unfolding. Something inside me shifted. And I let it. Then the door opened. And another presence entered. Not louder. And then it all shattered. Not in pain. In light. It was as if my body had become water. And they, the room, the memory. All became the sky. A storm didn't break over me. It broke through me. Breathless sobs poured from somewhere far beneath thought. Deeper than words have ever reached. I wasn't moaning. I wasn't speaking. I was remembering. My spine arched, not from pleasure, but from the force of truth. Finally erupting through a body that had gone silent for years. It felt like lightning striking water. A crack of light splitting my center. And filling every empty part one had grown used to calling normal. I wasn't just touched. I was opened. The space between my ribs, between my thighs, between myselves. All of it flooded. And I could do nothing but ride it. Trembling. Soundless and too loud all at once. I saw the ceiling blur into stars. I felt time dissolve. I didn't climax. I returned. Returned to a self that had always waited, just beneath the surface. For someone to ask, Are you ready to come home? And I was. God, I was. When it passed, when the waves softened, I collapsed. But I didn't fall alone. I was held. Arms. Yes, but also presence. Breath. Warmth. The echo of hands that never demanded, only invited. I had never known what it meant to be caught. Not just physically, but spiritually. And in that stillness, shaking, salt on my lips, I whispered it, barely audible. Thank you. It wasn't for the touch or the intensity. It was for the witnessing, for the way they saw me and didn't flinch, for the way I was allowed to fall apart without being asked to explain myself first. The room went silent, but inside me, something sacred had begun to sing. Not loud, not desperate, just true. And I knew, no matter what came after, no matter the guilt, no matter the story I'd returned to, I had felt myself again. Fully. Finally. And nothing could unknow that. When I walked into the house, it was quiet again. But not the kind of quiet that used to gnaw at me. This silence felt full, almost warm. He was there, on the edge of the sofa, one hand wrapped around a mug. Like he'd been waiting, not anxiously, but faithfully. He didn't rise. He didn't rush. He just looked at me, and something in his eyes cracked. Not with suspicion, with knowing. You're different, he said. Not accusing, not scared, just observing. I stood there, shoes still on, jacket unbuttoned, the scent of another world still clinging to my skin. I nodded. My throat tightened. I thought I might speak, but there were no rehearsed lines, no justifications, only truth, too wide and quiet for language. He put the mug down, walked to me, looked closer, like he could see all the things I'd left behind, and all the ones I had reclaimed. Then, after a pause that felt almost sacred, he asked, "Did it hurt?" His voice broke a little on the last word, like maybe he thought it should have. Like maybe love was supposed to cost something, to mean something. I met his gaze, softly, unflinching. "No," I whispered. It healed. And those words, those impossible, unraveling, tender words, hung in the space between us, like smoke. He didn't pull away. He didn't press. He just reached for my hand. Not like a man claiming, not like a husband holding territory, but like someone reaching out, to feel a sacred pulse he'd nearly forgotten was still there. His fingers touched mine, lightly at first, as if I were made of something newly born. And in that moment, I saw it in him too. Not jealousy, not resentment. Relief. Not because he understood everything, but because I had come back, whole. That's all he'd ever wanted, even when he didn't know how to ask for it. I wasn't the same woman he'd married, but maybe that was the point. Maybe marriage isn't a promise to stay unchanged. Maybe it's a prayer that when we lose ourselves, we find a way back, better. And I had. God, I had. If the person you loved, the one you built a life with, the one who folded laundry beside you and held your hair when you were sick, if they needed something you couldn't give, not because you weren't enough, but because they had forgotten how to feel, could you love them enough to let them be touched by someone else? Not just touched, but seen, unraveled, brought to the edge, and gathered back together, like silk threads through a trembling needle. Could you bear that? Could you bear the idea that their healing didn't happen in your arms? Would it destroy you? Or would it free you too? We talk about betrayal like it's always cruelty, but what if it's complexity? What if it's courage? I was faithful in all the ways the world counts, and yet, I crossed a line that can't be seen with the naked eye. It lives in the breath between intent and surrender. It asks a different kind of question. Is it betrayal if it brings you back in one piece? If the woman I became was more alive, more truthful, more capable of receiving love, was that a sin? Or a strange kind of grace? I don't have answers. Only echoes. But tell me honestly, what would you do? Would you hold on tighter? Or open the door and wait? Would you curse them for needing more? Or marvel when they returned? Glowing? I'm not asking for forgiveness. Only honesty. Tell me what you'd do. I'm genuinely curious.